The next call understands a split call, and Gareth Hughes, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Kia ora, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Kia ora. Following on from the contribution of Ms Collins, I'm sure that there are a few National Cabinet Ministers who would like to hear the end of those dulcet tones on Checkpoint, given what we've seen over the years. Now, Mr Speaker, I want to touch on a theme. You know, this is my third term of Parliament, and something I've noticed inexorably when the clerk reads out the new legislation being introduced at the beginning of Parliament, the numbers are massively down. It's been an awful long time since we've seen any new ideas, any new legislation, and here is a classic example. This is something which was referred from a committee, from a review from 2006, finally didn't get round to being issued to a select committee to 2009, and here's the government, nothing else, pressing on the legislative agenda, finally getting round 6 years later, finally looking round at getting this bill. It tells you a few things, Mr Speaker. If public broadcasting was a priority, this could have been knocked off many years ago. It's an uncontroversial bill. This bill simply enshrines in statute the Charter for Radio New Zealand, something that all parties in this Parliament agree on. It also says something of the government's priorities, Mr Speaker, because the only public broadcasting change, except for a massive funding freeze to the sector, is in fact an uncontroversial bill doing something which should have come about in the mid-2000s, which is setting out finally the Charter for Radio New Zealand. Now, it's not controversial. We're talking about a charter that talks about it being independent and commercial free, which is the moment, being in the freedom of thought and expression, fostering a sense of national identity, providing independent, freely accessible news, enriching our broadcasting environment. All good stuff, Mr Speaker, which I don't think anyone, in fact, none of the 165 submissions could be opposed to. But I do want to talk about something, Mr Speaker, because in Ms Collins' contribution, she talked about nothing being available for other broadcasters, highlighting somehow the taxpayer or the government's exceedingly high generosity funding public broadcasting or Radio New Zealand in New Zealand. One word, Mr Speaker, it's MediaWorks. We saw a fantastically huge bailout from MediaWorks, from this government and their stable of commercial radio stations. But let's look at the facts, Mr Speaker. In the last year of the last government, KPMG produced a report saying that Radio New Zealand was suffering from a funding shortfall in 2007. They recommended a $6.7 million urgent re-injection. What have we seen since then when the national government was elected in 2008? Zero. They've seen an absolute funding freeze across that period, which has been an effective funding cut to the only public broadcaster in this country, which is Radio New Zealand. TV1 and TV2, of course, are not public broadcasters. Māori TV serves a different service, an important service. We've seen a 9% real terms funding cut. This is something that needs to be addressed because it's important for all those reasons which we're passing into law now to foster that sense of national identity, to have that freely available independent news, to hear those Kiwi voices. And Mr Speaker, I wouldn't call the $25 million exceedingly generous. This is half, on a per capita basis, what the Australians fund for the ABC, a third what the Brits do when it comes to the BBC. Mr Speaker, we are a laggard when it comes to public broadcasting. So I challenge the government, if they're serious, put their money where their mouth is tomorrow. This is part of the foundation for a strong civic society, a foundation for our democracy. That's why the Greens are supporting public broadcasting, why we need a television public broadcaster. And really the question is for the government, just put your money where your mouth is.